those of you who have not joined us before, welcome to Bees, Dreams, and Medicine. This is our 11th talk of the year. We're super excited to welcome Dr. G, Gabrielle Francis. We have one last session, which is in 2 weeks with Mikael Joshin Thiele, who is one of our mentors, muses, and a wonderful apian being lover and advocate, and invite you to participate in that as well. And what we're going to do today is introduce you to the College of Melissa. For those of you who aren't familiar with it yet, we have a short video that Laura will show. And then we're going to turn the floor over to Dr. G. She's going to tell us about the Peruvian elders, Pachamama, Illumination, and more. And that'll be about 45, 50 minutes. And then Laura and she will have a conversation, and then we'll open up the floor to you for a Q&A.
Hello, I'm Laura B., and I'm the director and founder of the College of the Melissa Center for Secret Beekeeping. As you are well aware, the insect world and the animal queendom has been suffering for a long time on the planet today, as are humans, as we walk around in full awareness of our effects on the Anthropocene epoch. So in 2012, following Vision, I developed the College of the Melissa. This is an online learning platform devoted to the study of apiculture. And as we were uncovering the mysteries of the bee, we developed a six-fold sacred path. That is the science, the sacred, the history, the mystery, the art, medicine, and activism of the bee. First, let's start with science. Not only do we study traditional Western apiculture, we stretch and explore many multicultural approaches to taking care of the bee, from Zeidler beekeeping to indigenous beekeeping to the personal beekeeping style that you discover on your path. We also are interested in what is going on with the bee's body, forage, and the environment in general. Whenever you study the bee, you realize these amazing, gorgeous principles that lead us directly to the sacred. And what is sacred? Sacred are principles which shall not be violated. Take, for example, the principle of pollination. The bee in her generosity offers such a sacred template. And as we discover these amazing sacred principles of the bee, we'll find out that we're not the first ones to think of this. Peoples throughout the ages, across the world, anywhere we see people in relationship to honey-producing insects, we find wonderful history. And within that rich history is not only apiculture, but archetype, mythology, sacred relationship with the earth, which leads us to mystery. Mystery is really defined as what you find yourself as you gain an experience with meeting the bee on your own personal level. What does she say to you? What do you dream of? People everywhere associate the honeybee with dreaming and increased intuition. And we've certainly discovered that for ourselves. And of course, when you're following intuition, it leads us to art and medicine, something that we feel is a continuum. All art is medicine, and all medicine is an art. Whether you enjoy dance, painting, sculpture, jewelry making, all the way to the deep healing principles of the bee, we explore relationships with hive products. And of course, when you learn about the bee, you want to protect the bee. So the bee is the vanguard for all pollinators. And that leads us to activism. That which we love, we protect. So if you're interested in following this sort of way of studying the bee, please come and find us at collegeofthemelissa.com or write me directly at queenbee@collegeofthemelissa.com.
That was really a beautiful introduction. I love that video. And when you and Steve invited me to speak, I was thinking, what can I do that has something to do with bees? Because I don't really have that much experience except from the aspect of the medicinal properties of honey and royal jelly. But since you called it bees, dreams, and medicine, I said, well, I do know that the culture that I would like to talk about in Peru really talks about the dreams and how we can dream our world into being. So that's part of why I chose that. But now that I watched your little video, I'm so impressed because I really love all those pillars that you've touched on as a way of kind of studying any kind of culture. Because what I find in our society today in the Western world is that we decide that we want something from a culture that we want to make into our own, but we don't look at it in that holistic way. And so we take from it what we want from it. We don't see it in their whole context with the history and the tradition and the mystery. And most importantly, even is that activism where in so many of these cultures, this wisdom is dying out. And in order for it to stay viable for those communities and for us, we do have to keep giving back. And so anyway, I just wanted to thank you and Steve for inviting me. That video was beautiful. And I'm here to kind of talk about the Peruvian wisdom keepers. I titled the talk Illumination, honoring the Pachamama and the wisdom keepers of the Andes. So I'm going to take you guys on a little adventure to Peru. And the way I travel, you can go to the next slide, Steve. My name is Dr. Gabrielle Francis. My business name's called The Urban Alchemist. It's a little play on words. But I am a naturopath, a chiropractor, and an acupuncturist. And I've spent much of my professional time working in the music business, traveling with rock bands as their doctor on tour. And in all of those years of touring with rock groups, which was about 15 actually, when I wasn't on tour, I was traveling to other countries and learning medicine from those countries. And so the way I would approach travel is very much in the style of what my interest was, which is healing and music. And so when I enter a country, the first thing I want to know is where are the healers and where are the musicians? And often they're the same people. So I'm going to take you guys on a little adventure to Peru where we're going to meet the wisdom keepers of the Andes. Go ahead, Steve. These wisdom keepers are also known as earth keepers. And you can see that the world needs earth keepers more than ever now. Go ahead, Steve. And this is the vow of the earth keepers. It's actually the time of the earth keepers is now. They are the people who are here to protect the planet. And earth keepers are coming in all countries, all different colors, all different shapes and sizes of humans. Earth keepers have a vow to agree and join in the creation of the earth that we want our children to inherit, where the rivers are clean, the air is pure, where we live in peace with each other and where beauty and joy predominate. A planet where the experiment of life can continue in extraordinary and undreamt of ways. So an earth keeper is also kind of like a bodhisattva, the way they speak of a bodhisattva in Buddhism. It's someone who's come not only to just protect the earth, but to create some kind of healing and illumination among the humans here. So they're here to kind of bring enlightenment to everybody on the planet and our earth itself. Okay. The adventure starts in Cusco, where I actually was going to meet a friend of mine named Alberto Velodo. And Alberto is a Cuban. He has been an anthropologist for many, many, many years. He was a medical anthropologist, and I met him through a lot of my trainings in functional medicine. And I knew he spent a lot of time in Peru, and a lot of his philosophy and books were based on teachings he had learned from a specific group of Peruvian people. Now call them shaman, but this particular group would not identify themselves as shaman. That's just kind of how people would like to project to them. But he was doing a trip there with some people who were in his group that were going to get initiated, and I wanted to go to Peru, and he invited me to come along. So there was no intention like I'm going to Peru to become a shaman. It was more like, let's see what this guy's up to now. And this seems like a great way to immerse myself into Peru and the healing. Cusco was at one time the center of the Incan Empire. And if you want, you can go ahead and switch. It's a beautiful town, and it sits in this area called the Sacred Valley. And the Sacred Valley is kind of lush, and it's also where Machu Picchu is, but it's where all the remnants of the Inca are. You know, there's temples everywhere, there's beautiful structures, there's hikes and treks. But the Sacred Valley and the Cusco region of Peru is really where let's say, the center of the Incan Empire was. And, you know, something that I learned when I was traveling and meeting with Alberto, because I love being with anthropologists because they can give you all of that deep history. And I'm sure I'm not going to remember all of it perfectly, but the Incan Empire really was only a couple hundred years old. It wasn't like we think of every indigenous person in Peru and Bolivia and Chile as being Incan, but really there was thousands of years of different types of indigenous people in the Quechua and the Amara different language. There was many, many languages, but these were the main language families. And the Inca arose as a sect that kind of was a warrior sect, and they took over all of these tribes. So they were more of like the ruling class. They were warriors, very masculine, and they actually only ruled for a couple hundred years. Okay. And let's go on to the next chapter or next picture. The group that we're going to talk about are called the Q'ero. Now, the Q'ero were descendants of the Inca, and they speak a language called Quechua. Currently, there's less than 1,000 Q'ero people in Peru. And their story is that they actually were, you can move to the next slide, that they were a group of high priests originally. Okay, so the Spanish came, the Inca started in like the mid 1400s, and the Spanish kind of came in to conquer in the mid 1500s, and they were bringing Catholicism, and they were kind of moving into battle with the Inca. And believe it or not, it wasn't that hard for the Spanish to take over because the Incas were not that popular among the other indigenous tribes. They had done a lot to kind of colonize them. So the Spanish were very clever in that they got the other indigenous people to kind of help them take over the Incas. So it was a little bit of it wasn't just like, you know, Spanish against indigenous. The indigenous were helping to move these Inca rulers out because they were kind of brutal, and the Spanish were probably just as brutal, if not more so. But anyway, as the Spanish came in, they started to really impose Catholicism onto the people, and they were very intimidated by this particular group of high priests and their beliefs, their spiritual philosophies. They were known as Laika, Laika, and they were the high priests of the Inca. And so if you go to the next page, this was the time during the Inquisition. And so they were taking these high priests because whatever their knowledge was so intimidating to what the Spanish were trying to do over there, that they were really torturing people. And so there was a particular group of these people known as the Laika that took they basically fled Cusco and the Sacred Valley into the high mountains, Mount Augusante and other mountains, and they apparently just kind of disappeared from society. I can't tell you how many of them were at that time, but that is how the legend goes, that they basically took their knowledge and their prophecies, because they were known for having the prophecies for the time that is exactly right now. Okay. And Laika they were kind of healers, priests, but the Spanish had created such a demonization of them, calling them witches and sorcerers, that to this day, if you went to Peru and said, I want to find myself some Laika to get some medicine or healing, most of the local people would be very afraid for you, because they consider them to be, they still have like a negative connotation among the locals. But that's kind of how they identify, even though they know that they need to have some new branding done. Let's call it. They need to rebrand themselves. So anyway, they ascended to the mountains. And as we know, in Central America and South America, when the Spanish came in, there was the Catholicism and there was the indigenous religion. And the indigenous religion had different variations, as many as there were different tribes, but there's something that happens when two cultures blend together, and we call it syncretism. And so syncretism in Central and South America is where the Catholic, the indigenous people basically still practice very much traditionally in the same way that they practiced for thousands of years, but they did it inside of Catholicism. So they changed the names of their gods and goddesses to Catholic saints and Catholic names. And a lot of the holidays started to line up, like the solstice or the celebration of the sun became enmeshed with Christmas, the coming of Jesus, the light of the world. And so for hundreds and hundreds of years, what we'll see throughout Central and South America is kind of a new culture, a mestizo culture, which is a mixture of indigenous and Spanish. And the religion is very much a syncretized religion, where it's the traditional religion of the indigenous mixed with Catholicism. And so for hundreds and hundreds of years, these indigenous tribes have continued their kind of worship in this way. We can go on to the next slide. So the Laika, or the high priests, were up in the mountains, and they were waiting for their prophecy where they would know when it was time to start coming down. And they started to see signs in the earth that were signs of the time to come. And around 1950, they came down to a pilgrimage, and every year there's a pilgrimage and a gathering of shaman in the Mount Augusante region of Peru. And it's a festival that's called the Kiloriti, where they are there to worship the sun god. The Inca worship the god of the sun. And pilgrims come from all over Peru. And there's a whole section where the shaman go, and the shaman have their own little path, and the regular people have this path, and it's a festival full of music and worship and prayer and lots of debauchery and partying too. And it still goes on. But in 1950, the Laika descended because they said this was time for them to pass on their knowledge. And so they came down and they started to disperse information. And it was at that time that my teacher, Alberto Villotto, he started to kind of meet with them maybe in the 1970s. And the Laika originally started to kind of share their wisdom with the other indigenous people of Peru and the mestizos. But as anthropologists and Westerners started coming, they started to transmit that knowledge to other people too. Go on to the next page. The people who are coming down are known as Pacos. And Paco really means priest or wise one. They're also known as wisdom keepers. They don't identify as shaman. However, most Western people, when they see somebody like this, they think of them as a shaman, but they have a very traditional dress. And they're mystic practitioners. So they're into the experience of the divine. They heal with different types of techniques of healing, and they are there to share the prophecy. Somebody was asking about the women. There are women like yes. And as a matter of fact, they have their complete families. So most of the Kero or the Paco it's a tribe of families. So it's all their wisdom is being passed down. The ones that we're working with now, whenever I go to Peru, their fathers were the original Pacos that came down from the mountain for the first time in the 1950s. Something that I find so fascinating is if you study these people and you go back to their ethnic origin, there's believed to be 3 groups of people that originated from the descendants who crossed across the Bering Strait and then came down. So it's believed that they're actually Asian in origin. And the other cultures were there. It was this group of Inca, Hopi, and the Mayan. And so these 3 groups of people, if you look at their features, they look very Tibetan, because this group originated in Mongolia. Some of them became, the Tibetans and the Siberian shaman, which by the word shaman comes from Mongolia. The original shaman are in Mongolia. But then there was that group that came across the Bering Strait and then kind of moved their way down through North and South America. And what I find so fascinating about these Pacos, if you go on to the next thing, is that they are indigenous people, but they have a very Asian philosophy, okay? And even if you look at their hats have these multicolored chakra-looking things. And whereas you'll see in a lot of indigenous people, it's really about just worshiping kind of animals and the earth. And then there's the mixture of the Catholicism and how that came in. With the Kero and the Pacos and the Laika, however we want to identify it, their philosophy is very Asian. Okay, so first of all, they have the belief that the Mother Earth is who is, this is their mode. They worship Mother Earth, okay, and that they believe that we have become very out of balance with the Pachamama, Mother Earth. And the main source of their philosophy is to kind of bring people back into alignment or harmony with Mother Earth. And they call that alignment Aini. And Aini means a living in right relationship with the earth and with other people on the planet. Okay, you can go to the next one. They believe that, first of all, we're in a time that's called the time of Pachacuti. And Pachacuti was a name of one of the Inca warlords. He was actually an Inca leader. Pacha meaning earth, Kuti meaning shaker, okay? So living in the time of Pachacuti means we're living in a very tumultuous time where the earth is being shaken up. And the earth is being shaken up because we are not in harmony. We're doing things to destroy the earth. And it's this time of upheaval that comes before kind of this next phase, which is a great awakening. And they believe that we are here to actually evolve from human beings, Homo sapiens, to Homo luminous, light bodies. Okay, so they believe that we've come to this planet to evolve into beings of light. And that is very different than most indigenous beliefs of the Central and South America. It is a very Asian philosophy. To talk about light bodies and illuminations and chakras. And so you're going to see that their philosophy is so similar to Tibetan philosophy. And because it was never infiltrated by the Spanish, it's been very much preserved. Okay. This is the Pacos, and this is the teacher, Alberto. And so he's a wonderful guy. And actually, he's an amazing person to learn about the history. He's got incredible books. He does have a shaman training program that teaches people about the wisdom. And he was actually invited by these. He went to learn about them. He did not want to become a shaman. And I think that's probably one of the first characteristics that these kind of holy people will look for, is someone who's reluctant, because they see reluctance as humility. And so he went there to learn from them, but they had come at this time where they felt it was becoming urgent to pass this information on. And so they said that, hey, we want you to kind of start sharing this message with people in the world. And one of the ways they knew that is there was some melting going on in a glacier. That was one of their prophecies, that when the glacier started to melt and recede, that we would know this is time for this prophecy to be here. And another thing they are looking for is what they call when the eagle of the north and the condor of the south would come to meet. And so we believe that time is now, where the North America and South America are having kind of a healing conversation. And what we're seeing now is kind of where the wisdom and medicine of the Andes, and the Inca and the Quechua people, as well as the Maya, Aztec philosophies, and then the Amazonian spirituality. This is all, a lot of Western people are taking an interest in this. And, kind of what was happening in the 1970s with people going to India to learn about yoga, we're seeing this kind of movement to Central South America. And this was all part of their prophecy. Go ahead. So, whenever I'm traveling, I like to meet the locals. I love the little old ladies. This lady was a weaver, and she actually wove this hat. And all of the colors that she uses are from natural sources. So the red comes from the blood of insects, and the different colors are from different herbs and plants. And this is her pet llama. And then, of course, I like to hang out with the little kids, and they can show me what's fashionable. And Barbie needed a bath, so we gave her a bath in the river. And this is me getting ready to go out on the Inca Trail. But so I like to immerse myself in with the locals when I travel. And, believe it or not, a lot of these people don't really even speak Spanish, but there's other ways to communicate when you travel. And when you force yourself into those situations, you find those universal languages. Next. So when you get to Peru, the first thing they're going to have you do in all of your hotels is drink coca leaf tea. And the coca leaf was a sacred plant to the Inca. It comes from this is from the coca plant, which is where cocaine comes from. It's extremely energizing, as you can imagine. And they steep the actual leaves in a hot tea. Gives people a lot of energy, but the main purpose of it really is that it prevents altitude sickness. So it helps to thin the blood, because most altitude sickness comes from a thickening of the blood. So that's my coca tea at this resort I was staying at. Go ahead, next. And I was just spending time with Alberto and his group, and, kind of sitting on the sidelines and watching. But then whenever I could, I would join Alberto and his Laika Paco teachers, and I would just kind of ask them questions about what they were doing and themselves. And a couple weeks into it, I started to get the word from Alberto that, okay, they want to do transmissions of their knowledge to you. And I said, okay, what does that mean? I don't want to be a shaman. I'm not qualified to be a shaman, you know. And even if I was, I just don't, I would be too overwhelming for me to work in that way with people, but they did not let up on that. And so I agreed to allow them to do the transmissions. And I'll explain a little bit about what those are, but right now they're actually longing for people to do transmissions with. And transmissions are basically a passing on of ancient wisdom and knowledge. And in all cultures, they do transmissions in different ways. It's usually a teacher to a student, and it's a spiritual ceremony that basically brings in the wisdom from the ancient ones, from the elders who have crossed over, from the ancestors. And the Karo ancestors believe that they have animals that are part of their ancestry, that they have other indigenous healers, that they have Inca rulers, that there's angels. And they also believe that beings from the constellation Pleiades are part of the transmission of what you'll receive. Go on next. So they do different things to, they basically, their life is almost all ceremony. I was so enchanted to watch them because they're very simple. They don't talk a lot. They laugh all the time. They're like very cute. And they kind of seem like they're always huddled together with each other, chuckling about things, but they don't have a lot of words. It seems like when they do have words, they're prayers. And before any kind of ceremony that they do something called an opening of the Wiracocha. And the Wiracocha is what they call the sacred space around all things. And so the opening of the Wiracocha means that we find an area that we're going to create sacred space. And inside that space, we're going to create an altar, a prayer. We're going to make a dedication and offering. And, sacred space is something that's believed of in a lot of ancient cultures. And so that starts with that. And Wiracocha actually was one of the Inca gods. It was the Inca god of creation, whereas it was a male. Wiracocha was the male god of creation, and Pachamama was his wife. Okay, so the god of creation and Mother Earth were husband and wife. And so they open with the Wiracocha, the sacred space, and then they do something called a despacho. And a despacho is a prayer offering, but it's done, and you can see the picture there. They're sitting in front of this little pile of herbs and little artifacts, and they set out this kind of little piece of paper. And first thing, they dedicate their ceremony to either a person or a cause. And what the despacho is basically like a living mandala. So they spend about an hour gathering the items. As they're gathering the items, they pray, and they gather and they pray into the flowers or the herbs, or, and this despacho has candy, but they're praying for whoever the despacho is being offered to, where the ceremony is being offered to. And a despacho can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours to create. It's a ritual preparation. And at the end of the ceremony, the despacho is burned in the fire as a way of showing that there's impermanence in all things. Next. And, I at one point asked one of my Paco elders, why do you do despachos for everything? I mean, doesn't this take a lot of time when you could get right into the thing? And he just looked at me and he smiled and he said, the problem with Western culture is as you're losing your family, as you're losing your ethnicities, and as you're losing your religion, you're losing ritual. And rituals what ground spirituality into everyday life. And, you know, I never forgot that. It's one of the most important things I carry with me every day, because I can see that really happening in society, that we're losing ritual. And as we lose the rituals that we were born into, of the cultures we were born into, we really do need it. And so we might be seeking it somewhere else. So somebody might say, oh, I'm not going to be a Catholic anymore, but I'm going to immerse myself in yoga and Buddhism. So I think it's human nature to have rituals as a way of kind of grounding spirituality into daily life. Next.
Just to give you a 20-minute time.
Okay, cool. The Pacos believe that we are actually dreaming our world into being. So there's all this, belief now in quantum physics and science, where we are actually all light, and that matter doesn't exist until we actually think it and see it with our own eyes, and then matter comes to life. So quantum physics has kind of taken over, and it's part of our spiritual belief too. But the Pacos have believed this for hundreds and hundreds of years, that actually we are creators of our own dream and we are masters of our own destiny. And I just think that this is such a advanced mysticism for these small little indigenous people. So they believe that we create divine. We are creating the world with our thoughts, and that we are masters of that. And the ways we master it are through something called the 4 insights. Next. And 4 insights are pretty much, I love, this is taken from Alberto's book about the 4 insights. And he spent many years kind of getting this in a way that it would be understandable for the Western mind, because these kind of people don't really teach in a linear way, okay? They teach in a very different way that's often hard for a Western mind to grasp. What I love about Alberto, first of all, is that he honors those people and that the source of the wisdom is them. And the Pacos believe the source of the wisdom is Pachamama and the creator. So they don't ever take any kind of credit for inventing anything. But the way of the hero, these are kind of archetypal paths of healing. And there's 4 different archetypal paths. And each archetypal path is also represented by a power animal. And most indigenous cultures use animals to represent archetypes, okay? The word animal comes from the word anima, or soul. And there are ways of we all have all these archetypes within ourselves, and activating these archetypes is ways that we can kind of manifest the God within us. So the 4 insights, the way of the hero is one, and this one is represented by the animal, the serpent or the snake. It's our physical world, and it's the language of our cells and our body. And the purpose of this is to turn our wounds into the sources of our power and compassion. So to use our physical pain and our body is a way to transform ourselves and to help other people. And the main principles in this particular insight are non-judgment, non-suffering, non-attachment, and seeing beauty in everything. And you can see, if you look at these words, I mean, they're so Buddhist, aren't they? Okay, go ahead to the next one. The way of the luminous warrior. This is represented by the power animal, the jaguar. And the jaguar is a very famous, jaguar medicine is very famous in South America. And the jaguar is to kind of teach us the way of fearlessness, to not be afraid, to walk with strength and trust in the world. It represents our mind. And the language of the warrior or the jaguar is words and feelings. And it's also here to show us that things that we think are real in life are an illusion. Okay. And the main attributes of the warrior or the jaguar are fearlessness, non-doing, letting things be, walking through certainty after you've making choices, not being in fear, and non-engagement, which is basically giving up your need to be right and letting things be a little bit more open and relaxed. Next. The way of the seer is representative of the hummingbird. The hummingbirds are very common in South America, and they're these little birds, but they fly for thousands and thousands of miles, and they represent our soul, okay? And they call it the seer. The language of the hummingbird is art, music, chanting, drumming, and it's the kind of journey of really going on the hero's journey, just like, what am I going to create in my world? And I'm going to do anything I can to get there. So the way of the seer, the things that we need to manifest that are a beginner's mind or an innocence, living consequently, which is taking intention, being transparent and honest, and having integrity. And the final one, next, Steve, is the level of the eagle or the condor, is what they call the eagle in South America. This is the level of the spirit, the sage. This is only energy. And it's a way of kind of being in the world where you can see the big picture, know everything. And you're kind of just in harmony with God, Pachamama, and Mother Nature. So we all have all of these paths in us at different times in our incarnation. And it's not really linear. Like there's people who start here and then as they get older, go into another one of these archetypes. So it wouldn't be like we go from body to spirit. We all go through all of this at different stages in our life, and they just kind of want always for you to identify where you're at so you can kind of work with Pachamama to kind of have healing in that stage. Okay, next one. So one of the main, so the goal with the Pacos is to show us that we are basically on this earth to become enlightened. We're here to become a light being. And as basically that soon the earth is going to not be something that we can live on. So we are all going to be beings of light. And one of the main ways that we become beings of light is through love. And the Karo believe in the type of love that's more like the agape love, the universal love, okay? And they call that the Munai. And the transmissions that they do are called the Munai key, the transmissions of love. And so when I was given these transmissions, the way it worked was they chose a different site throughout the Sacred Valley for each transmission. And we did one per week. And they would teach me a little bit about it. Alberto would translate because my Spanish wasn't that great, but they didn't even really want to talk about it. They just want to give it. But in my mind, I wanted to understand it. So Alberto did the translation. But the Munai key are transmissions of that ancient knowledge that are done through ceremony. And the ceremonies involve the opening of the Wiracocha, the sage, the other incenses that they have, the despacho, and then there's this kind of prayer transmission where they would pray over you and you could just kind of feel that wisdom coming through you. So the Munai key are the 7 rites of passage, or the seer's right, the harmony right, the bands of power, healer's right, day keeper's right, wisdom keeper's right, earth keeper's right, star keeper's right, and creator right. So I received all of those over the course of a couple months, and I feel it changed me, I feel something in me, and I can't even really identify what that is. I think I bring it to my work, and I don't say that I practice shamanism, but I feel like it's something in me. And one of the main ways that the Pacos believe that we will get to that homo luminous is with a technique they call the illumination process. Now, these men are not just priests, they're actually healers, and people will go to them for treatments. And the treatment can involve an illumination, which is a chakra clearing. It can involve soul retrieval. It can involve Olympia, a type of cleansing. There's so many different things, little techniques that they have to offer you, which they determine based on the intake. But something everybody gets is the opening of the Viracocha and the illumination. Everything starts with the illumination. So the basically opening of all of the chakras and a cleansing of the chakras, not just an opening of them, but a cleansing, because they believe the chakras, which are energy centers, need to be purified in order for us to find enlightenment. Next. So the chakras are basically these wheels of energy along our pathways here. And the illumination is a cleansing or a clearing of all the old waste products. The old waste products comes from negativity, from trauma, from health and disease problems. It can also come from another lifetime. And, we have 7 chakras in the body. I'll briefly go through those, but maybe that's something we should wait on because I know the time is coming up, right? Laura?
You have about 10, 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. So why don't I quickly review the chakras and just kind of how they believe about the chakras, okay? So basically the chakras, let's go to the next one, are the 7 energy centers in our body. And each chakra is attached to a different organ system, and there's a different glandular system associated with them, but they're like little wheels of energy. It's a very Asian philosophy, and this is why it's so unusual to see this here in Central America. But if we understand their ethnic origin, we can see that. And so we have the 7 chakras. The Pacos believe in both an 8th and a 9th chakra. So we'll go through the 7 chakras, but the 8th and the 9th chakra, the 8th chakra is above the head, and that would be more of the soul. And we identify it as, if you've seen saints with halos, that's what they believe is the 8th chakra. And that when somebody dies, what's going to happen is all of their energy centers are going to fold up, go through a tunnel into the 8th chakra, and then that's going to connect onto the universe and the 9th chakra, which is spirit. So the 8th chakra is our soul, the 9th chakra is spirit. And at the end of our life, all of that information from our lifetime, what was healed and what wasn't healed, is going to fold up into the chakras, kind of come out through our bodies and move out there into the universe until it's time to take another body. And so what they believe, they do believe in reincarnation. They believe that our job here on earth is to clean out our chakras, to kind of make sure that we're leaving the planet, our bodies, with as clear of an energy field as possible, making sure we've healed as much as we can, so that when we move into our next life, we've moved into a more evolved state. Does that make sense? Okay. So most people probably know a little bit about the chakras, but I thought I could have just review. And in the handouts I gave you a nice monograph of each chakra that's much more involved than this. But in general, we've got the first 2 chakras, which are the first chakra is the root chakra. It's represented by the color red, and the organs are the colon, but also the ovaries and the testes. And this is our survival chakra. It's our family of origin, survival, how we kind of how we feel safe in the world. And when there's negative expressions of this chakra, we're going to see hoarding, predatory behavior, violence, fear, abandonment issues, people having issues with their family of origin. Next. And the second chakra is represented by the color orange, and its actually element is water. It's ruled by the intestines. Some people will often call it the adrenal chakra as the glandular part. It's our ability to create and manifest money, power. It's, I work in fertility a lot, and a lot of my patients will use the word infertility. I said, this is the same chakra as money and relationship and sex. So, if you've been using, and also creativity and art and music and stuff. So a lot of times we're using those energies of the chakra for something else than procreating, but it's the same source. And when it's in balance, we have creativity, compassion, a healthy relationship to family and friends, and sexuality. And when it's negative, we have a lot of issues in relationship to those particular things, as well as a lot of fear and non-harmonious relationships. Next. The third chakra is yellow, and this is our power center. It's associated with the color yellow. It's a fire, and it's ruled by our stomach, our liver, our pancreas. This is the source of our individuation, our personal power, our ability to manifest things and feel strong in the world, feel empowered. And when it's out of balance, besides gastrointestinal problems, you'll have very, very big problems with energy, focus. You can have an inflated ego, or you could have not enough of an ego. So your self-esteem could be very poor. So either way, those are relationships with our third chakra being out of balance. The fourth chakra, next, is our heart center. And this is an air element. It's ruled by green. It rules our heart, lungs, and our immune system, the thymus gland. And it's very much represents that kind of agape love I was talking about, that universal love, empathy, compassion. So when it's in balance, we have that compassion. What?
I muted somebody. They were unmuted, evidently.
Oh, I'm sorry, hon. When it's out of balance, we can have these things of resentment and loneliness, abandonment. Next. The fifth chakra, our throat chakra, is the element is light, or the ether sometimes. It's kind of a turquoise type of blue. It ruled by our throat. And it really rules our expression, our ability to express what we feel that comes through our spirit. And this is also the ability to manifest our dreams and our creative manifestation. Glands are the thyroid and the parathyroid. And these are the negative expressions are things like gossip, toxicity, not speaking your truth, those kind of things. The sixth chakra is our third eye, and this is an indigo color. The element is pure light. This represents truth. The body aspects are the brain, the eyes, the nervous system, and also our pituitary gland. And this is our enlightenment chakra, self-realization. And when it's out of balance, there can be psychosis or issues related to delusions of grandeur, or not seeing yourself in connection with the world, or with spirit, I should say. And the seventh chakra is our crown chakra, and this is pure energy. It's just one next level. We're going to go into the soul and then the spirit. So this is kind of represents a lot of the chakras all in one. It is represented by the pineal gland, which regulates all of the rhythms in our body. And psychologically, it is our selflessness, wisdom, integrity, honor. And when it's out of balance, it can cause different types of emotional and spiritual and mental problems. And next one. So basically, the illumination process is a healing of the chakras, a cleansing, I would say. And I was going to show you guys how to do this. And then I really checked in with myself and I thought, you know, this isn't something people do on themselves. This is actually a treatment that the healer performs on somebody else, where they identify an area where there's blockage, and that's with a conversation. It's also with different ways they check. And it's a cleansing ritual that cleans out all the toxic waste and sludge of the chakras, cleans it out, opens them up, cleans them out, and then brings new light back in. Next page. This is a picture of me getting an illumination at a healing center in the Sacred Valley. Next. And this is just the different steps of the illumination that the healer would go through. I just don't feel like it would be ethical for me to teach people how to do this themselves. Because what we see now is a lot of people are taking upon themselves ancient wisdom and doing it in a way that maybe is a little bit not safe for people. So I just wanted to share it with you, but I want you to be able to identify what it is and maybe seek it out from a shaman or a healer, or if you go to Peru, get an illumination directly from one of those Pacos, because they actually do these treatments. Another thing is, when you go to Peru to get these kind of treatments, they would never charge you, okay? These are donations. We definitely think it's important that you give them money as a gift for their time, because this money goes back to the community. But these type of healers cannot really charge ethically for their services. Next. This is me with my hat. I just wanted to show you how they have those chakra colors are in the hats of the Paco. And I have a whole bunch of resources here for you, because I want you guys to be able to, when you go to Peru, identify a Paco, identify the Caro, and be able to receive some kind of special treatment or blessing from them. Right now, there's a lot of them coming here that are actually disseminating and doing their Munai Ki for groups of people in America. And these are the traditional Paco. They really have been told that it is time to share this transmission, this wisdom. So this isn't people exploiting them, although I believe that all of these cultures are getting exploited as well. But these men and women are here to transmit the knowledge, and they are trying to do it en masse because they think we're at that time in society. So you can even go to places like the Open Center or different retreat centers where you'll see them coming to do these transmissions, and Alberto often will bring them with him too. And these are resources so you can learn about them, or if you're interested in studying more about their medicine, I put very different schools. And at the end of my resource page, I put down a lot of different organizations that are giving back to the Caro, because the way that Laura ended her video with, I think, is very important, that in order for ancient wisdom to continue to perpetuate, we've got to be able to help those cultures to survive. And so there's a lot of wonderful organizations where you can give back by helping these Caro communities. And so, next, I think that's it. Okay, for millennia, the wisdom keepers of the Andes have understood that Western culture has ignored that true healing is the awakening to a vision of our healed nature and the experience of infinity. And so I'm wishing that you can all awaken the dreamer within you and be in harmony, right relationship with Pachamama, also known as Aini. Aho. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome. That was so awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, there was I had a hot flash in the middle of it. I
Laura, before you jump into your conversation, people, if anybody has a question, please write it in the chat and we'll keep track of them and ask them at the end of the conversation.
Yeah, wow, that was so awesome. I'm really, well, first off, I was really taken into my love of anthropology again, you know, how studying a culture, you know, how approaching the culture from this kind of study that you were talking about, just how you set it all up. It's just, I love that so much. It's just it's such a sensorial thing for me to hear these kinds of ways that you described it with the history and everything. So I really want to say thank you for context and perspective and history, and like really just a nice little opening through time and space into the ribbon of this culture, and how wonderful. And
You know what's interesting about that kind of thing too, is I really love that, because what I think is that it tells us the story of migration so much, of how there's like everything is kind of an expansion and an immersion with what's coming next. But so many of these indigenous cultures, they don't even know their origin. Like those Pacos don't know that they're ethnically connected to Tibetan Buddhists. You know what I mean? Somehow though, I just love knowing that, you know, it just gives me some kind of deeper knowing of it. But often those cultures themselves don't understand it.
well, it's what you're saying also is, you know, when we're talking about genetic history or cultural history, we're really talking about, you know, thought lineages, because it just shows that right now, wherever you're standing is this point in a river of historical and historical lineage, you know, and I really enjoy that. I mean, we have all these people in this nation, in this Western culture, seeking our genetic identity, and a lot of it is because we're seeking that relationship with Earth, as you know, the continuity. Since, like you were saying, we don't, a lot of Western culture doesn't have these rituals. We're washing out our individualization. And I love that. And I also, but it's becoming a new culture. It's not an absence of culture. It's a different style of culture, not based on ancient wisdoms. One thing that you were saying too that I really appreciated is this desire to come forward and tell people. Can you talk a little bit more about that? That, you know, that aspect of this, like coming out of the mountains to tell these stories. Can you talk?
Well, there's a real sense of urgency. Okay, so the men and women that if you go to Peru now, the men and women are the children of the original shaman who came down, and for 500 years, those high priests and their group of people had really no contact with the rest of society, but they were waiting for the signs in the world. They were waiting for the environmental signs. And they came down in 1950 because there were the environmental signs. But as they came down, the glaciers started to kind of recede, and the destruction to the earth have really become so apparent that they see a sense of urgency right now. And that by them sharing, that is their reason for being here. They really believe that their purpose is to share. And I find it very common in Central and South America for the indigenous people to be very open to sharing with foreigners. It's part of it is because their own people don't want to learn from them anymore. There's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, young people, and we see with globalization, young people don't want to learn from their elders. They want Disney and Nike, like most teenagers do. But to learn grandpa's medicine might not be so hip anymore, because that's partially like what they're exposed to. But there's that religious influence that's making a big problem with that too. So the evangelical Christianity has come in, and it's actually kind of making people feel that there's a lot of conversion to the evangelicals, because they're bringing things that people need, like money and antibiotics and jobs and church, but Jesus comes with it. And their particular brand of Christianity, it's different than the Catholicism. It's more like Jesus is the only way, and all that other stuff is witchcraft, work of the devil. So you have it's a very large amount of Central and South American indigenous that are converting to the evangelical path. And so the shaman, the sages, the wise women, the curanderas have nobody to share their wisdom with. And so there is a sense of urgency when they see a Western or for a Western person that comes and really wants to learn from them. They can't be more happy than to share it. And I found that it's a terrible thing that that's happening, that the people don't want to learn from their elders anymore in their own cultures. But it's because of that that I've been able to have the kind of access I've had to be able to learn from them. And I think one of the things that I really want to do is to help bring their own communities back into interest. And there is a bit of a movement in that in the last few years of more young people starting to want to come back, maybe because they're saying, oh, the Westerners think it's cool. Maybe it is cool, you know?
Or maybe because the people are waking up like so many of us are, that actually we do need to know this. So we can't forget this, and that there isn't value in the Western ideas. You know, I often think about Disney and princesses and stuff. And I sort of think that the whole reason why we all love the Disney princess, or we used to when we were children, or some people still do, I suppose, but is because it's the only way that we have to show a priestess or somebody who can be dress up and be in charge of a room. You know, we don't really have that in this culture, this mysterious feminine power. You know, I just sort of feel like that's the impact. We're wearing pink, not red, you know, but it's on the way, you know.
Well, you know, I toured with rock bands, right? And I feel like the rock stars and the celebrities are the modern day archetypes. Okay. I think it's in human nature that we have these patterns within ourselves that we want to activate. And whether it's through what you activated through Christianity and the saints and Jesus and Mary, or whether it was the Greek gods or the Roman gods or the indigenous gods and goddesses. Well, I believe that the rock stars and the celebrities are kind of those, they're awake, they're still those modern day archetypes, right? If maybe we can see that for what it is, and maybe there could be some less judgment around it. I don't know, you know?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe it's about what is it that they're the archetypes of? Is it power, money, and sex, or is it, you know, is it peace, love, and healing? I mean, and then also, did it start out one way and turn something else? But ultimately, that's why we're doing this series, is because we want to identify our cultural archetypes. What do we see ourselves as going into the future? And I think it comes up, this concept, you know, in almost every conversation that I'm having with other people, other thinkers in this experience, you know, we're always touching on the points of cultural appropriation and stuff. And I know we don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but this is a little bit on topic, because there is this movement. When you and I were studying in our younger years, the anthropological movement was to understand the other, to speak for the other, to try to highlight the other and teach the other. And when, you know, and then it got somehow, you know, shifted and bastardized and turned into something else. But what I think we need to understand, that this isn't that we are being given these traditions. It's that we're being given the opportunity to learn from those traditions, so that we can come up with an authentic relationship with my own, you know, with my own relationship with the earth. Because when I look at Pachamama in my neighborhood, I could look at Pachamama like the Andes. And if I went to the Andes and lived in the green forest, it would be all Pachamama all day, every day. But I live across the street from a vineyard, across the street from a horse farm, and all kinds of stuff is going on there, you know, that, and that's my Pachamama. So I got to get in balance with her and stop the glyphosate and so forth. So what do you think about that? Like, you know, you learn something from them, but you become something new. I love that idea of what did you call it?
Syncretism.
Syncretism, yeah. Like, and one thing I do know is that every time you have a quote unquote conquered culture, what eventually happens is that that culture comes through. They color the saints in the colors of their dresses and their outfits. We don't,
Yeah.
it doesn't just stay the oversoul. I mean, the overlords. What
Right.
comes out is what belongs,
Yeah.
So can you talk about what is that process
I
been
think
like
it's
you?
really just important to kind of, for me, I really love to understand where things have come from, to understand the spirit of what is coming to you.
Mhm.
And why is it that I want to learn from these people? And what is it that they're here to share with me? What can I give back also? It's not just about a take, it's what can I give back? And am I honoring that they were the ones that shared that with me? Because
Mhm.
most of those cultures too would never say that they invented anything.
Mhm.
All of this is really kind of transmission of spirit and a sharing of that in different forms, right? And I think that when people get accused of cultural appropriation, it's usually because the intention behind it didn't seem authentic to other people. Either they were too in their ego, they were trying to take credit for something. And then, I think there's people who are being wrongly accused of cultural appropriation, you know what I mean?
Well,
But I think one of the things to avoid that is to always honor the culture and the story behind it, because all of these are really an extension and a story of migration and expression and mixing. And sometimes that's happened in a very violent way, and sometimes it's happened in a not so violent way. But acknowledging where it's from
Mhm.
and what we can learn from it, what we can give back, and giving credit where credit's due, I think all of it is important.
And I think one thing I learned also is that, we can't, it's difficult. It's not fair to claim another culture's experience and way of life, but especially to get some kind of spiritual cred. But it is valuable to like you said, to stay, where did my heart get touched? I've been a seeker, a spiritual seeker my whole life. And even as a child, very young child, I was doing things like wandering into the Foursquare Baptist Bible School with my parents' permission to go down the street and go to church. And I was like in second grade, and I'd go by myself and I'd eat with the Hare Krishnas, and I'd go to the church and I'd sit there and I'd make my head a bowl, and I would imagine that the light is pouring in, and nothing ever came. And this went on until I was a teenager. And I would pray. I was tried to become a Catholic. Every single thing I could think of, I tried to do it. And when I was a teenager, I skipped school and I was a sophomore, and I was going hiking, and I was like, wait a minute, the Native Americans, this is what I believe, that God, whatever it is right here. And the Native American religions gave me that. I was the biggest gift of my life.
Mhm.
So in a way that
You're a mystic.
yeah, very like, but the idea of, when something is given in your heart and brings you illumination, that's not mine, but boy, it showed me what is mine. And that's my picture of the earth. It showed me one way to look at it.
It would be like saying that God wants to keep gifts only for himself, right? Because I believe all of this wisdom is meant to be shared. Maybe it's meant to be shared with certain people, or certain people will be touched by it. But I think the universal energy of God or enlightenment, male or female or combination, is a very generous energy, and it wants to expand and grow.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And it's like, as much as the earth is being resource, raped, for lack of any more appropriate word, there's one resource that is not, that is an absolute endless supply, and that is in prayer. That when you said that they believe that Pachamama is the first oracle or the first prophecy, or that's so true. That's true of this bee priestess kind of Minoan sort of Indo-European tradition that we're loosely influenced by through mythology and archetype. That's also what the Greeks say, is that the Gaia, the Mother Earth, is the first oracle. And really, truly it is, because what's happening right now is happening to all of us. What's happening to her is happening to all of us. And just like these people seeing that the glaciers changed, it's time to start changing our culture. And I actually see it in the animal world. The monarch butterfly started speaking to me a couple summers ago, and I was bidden and moved by my body to find cocoon and caterpillar and butterflies for that entire summer. I did a bunch of paintings on it, and that was the last summer they were here. They might be coming back, but that was the last summer they were here. They stopped coming for a couple years. So, when we develop our relationship to that listening, it's for everybody. Everybody can have that. And these stories are a way to remind us, okay, that's the name of this culture. And we may not have the name from some indigenous root culture from my ancestors when they lived in a manner of maybe 3 or 4 different continents. I don't even know what the root culture is. But putting down roots is root culture. I think listening to the plants and animals sing, and any culture is just a matter of discipline, whether it's discipline of thought or daily ritual or interaction.
Did you think about the concept of ritual to ground spirituality into daily life? Wasn't that sweet?
That's amazing. And that's absolutely true, because it makes you remember that the earth is so precious, that this moment is so precious, instead of always rushing toward want and need. And my dad used to describe it as be a Buddhist thing. He's a Buddhist, and he described it as the second level of hell, that it's a great big tummy and a little tiny mouth, and that we're just trying to stuff so much in, when really it's just like, this is all you need to do. And just drink in the silence, because that's infinite supply and infinite beauty, in the silence. That to me is what you're speaking of with this wisdom of these wisdom keepers. I don't know if you had a chance to read the little piece I wrote for this talk today, but I remember going up and driving up to the top of these high mountains, and they were just baby mountains. They didn't even have snow on them. And they were underneath these bigger mountains that were even further away and bigger and taller, and some kind of infinity. And I'm driving up there, and we must have been driven for we must have been 20 miles minimum from anything that you could see, even a road off to the side. And out there is this beautiful woman and very little people. And she's up there against the sky, and she's taking these sheep over the hill, and the clouds are sort of following her over the hill. And I got this sense of the vastness of space, and how outer space cosmos just kind of sits, like the toes are right there on the top of those mountains. And it dawned on me the amount of silence that she would hear in her life, the music of that. And that really blew me away. I never saw heaven touching earth until I saw this moment with that woman.
I totally agree. I feel like there's something, and I could see that when I was in Tibet too. There's something really so different about these people, and that it's like they're in the earth, but not of the earth, They're very earthy. They're playing with the animals, but they're just beyond that in a way. They're like little living enlightened beings that don't even know what that really is. And it's just in their presence and their way of being. Yeah. It's really something to watch.
Maybe that's because there's a connection to ancestry, because when you believe in ancestors, not just what did they give me genetically, what did they give me, what do I get to claim culturally because they wore that special overalls, or whatever, which is German. But so instead of that, it's like the animals are actually their brothers and sisters. When the potato dies because of a drought, that's killing their family, both literally and figuratively, and it's an ancestral relationship. We've always lived with the potato they've always been in my bed, under the bed in the house. Like this is, I really love that. I really learned that also about that when I was there too, that, the potato is family.
Yeah, they talk about the corn and everything like that, right? And they believe that that the parents pass on that kind of ancestral wisdom. I guess we could call it the genetics in a way if we were going to use our language for it, but for them, they're passing on the ancestral wisdom. But they believe that we still have the free will in our lifetime to dream a new dream, that we're not confined to those stories, that we can actually dream a new world beyond that. And it's really like a almost childlike way of describing what we call epigenetics now. In epigenetics, we know that, you inherit the DNA from your mother and father, but whether that DNA expresses itself has to do with what we surround our genes with, the the surrounding, so we can change our genetic outcome with our beliefs, our relationships, what we say, what we do, what we eat, what we, and so we know that. It's like kind of, they know this, they just are saying it in a different language.
And I think, yeah. And I think what you were saying about this, I mean, what a sophisticated, complex, sophisticated set of philosophies. And it should not surprise us, because when you have intergenerational wisdom, this is broken, of course, through colonialism. And as you were saying, many hundreds of years of multiple cultures of colonialism on some of these people, but being able to live with a lot of the same practices and foods and life and landmarks, this knowledge is held in this, maybe even the brain. My dad said many, many years ago when I was a little kid, he thought that the brain had all this ancestor knowledge in it. And he tested me, said, "What's that plant over there we were hiking?" I said, "Heather." And he felt like there was no way I would know that, except to know that perhaps that was kind of ancestral knowledge, because we were hiking up in the mountains, and why would I know that as an 8-year-old or something? But so that maybe, like, since we're only using 10% of our brain, that some of it is ancestral knowledge. So of course the humbleness of being a wisdom keeper of that place would be like, why would I take credit for this? This is just, it's like saying, you're not going to pay me to tell you that's a mountain and that's a sky. Everybody knows that. You're just a little baby. You're not very smart, like, I'm sorry, sweetie, like, I'm going to teach you these normal things because you forgot, And I think we can all find them through these beautiful tales, cultural tales can give us the kind of a storybook, but really the impetus is go outside, contemplate it with the body. And not just the mind. Yeah, not just the mind. Well, I know that there's a couple questions that have come up while we've been chatting. So again, thank you so much. And there's something that I heard from my dad, that he says that when you're around teachers, good teachers, that something in you can, without even, you don't have to think your way through it. You become more enlightened. And I'm touched by what you taught today, and the vulnerability with how you're sharing what you know, and also just the joy with what you're sharing what you know. And I just really want to say thank you. You brought definitely some wonderful ideas to my own study. So
I take that as a huge compliment, because after seeing your little movie, I was like, wow.
Isn't it great? It's wonderful.
Yeah, your pillars are on point, girl.
Well, it's a hope that all sciences, especially animal sciences, is studied that way. Like, wouldn't it be cool if we studied whales from the sacred and the history and the act of it, if everything had that whole component.
And how they overlap, because people think, oh, if you're an anthropologist, you can't be into the spirituality.
Right.
The only anthropologists I know are spiritual anthropologists.
Yes. And
it's like, it all is kind of connected, and we don't have to be, we can't be a scientist, and we can be a scientist and be a spiritual person too, you know?
Yeah, and isn't a shaman essentially a scientist and a historian and a language person and a doctor and all these things? It's not a simple little people, brown people wearing colorful clothes doing things. These are this culture, this, to have that status in this culture is to be in a position of excellence and knowledge, and not just an inborn power, but a discipline and a practice. So I think you really brought honor to that.
Really good point. Yeah.
You really brought honor to that. So thank you again. And Steve, it's tag, you're it. Thank you again.
I feel like the two of you could just have this back and forth and back and forth. So it's really wonderful for me personally to see the two of you connecting, because I've known Dr. G for a very long time. I think it's like 12 years or so. And Laura as my muse and somebody who has directed my life and career into a different path. So for you two to connect is wonderful. So thank you for
Thank you,
both
Steve.
of you being here.
It all happened.
So now we go into the question and answer session. If anybody has more questions, please write them in the chat. We have a couple already. And one was a comment, I don't know who it was, maybe Pamela, who said, wow, these photographs are amazing in your presentation. So I just wanted to know, did you take these pictures?
Yeah.
Wow. So talented with the camera as well, because they are really beautiful.
The subjects are pretty photogenic.
Yeah. And the landscape, wow, it's just spectacular. So Pamela had another question. You were talking about the different archetypes, the sage, seer, and warrior, and I'm not sure if there was a fourth. And she was wondering if those were from Alberto's book, and if so,
the
could
four
you tell
insights.
The four insights?
The four insights.
Okay, I'm just going to type that in.
First of all, I recommend, I love all of Alberto's books. I think he really does a great job of taking, first of all, I think he always gives credit where credit's due, but he has a really great way of taking the knowledge of the Q'ero people and putting it into a kind of a methodical way of us processing it. But it doesn't put your brain in only science mode. He's really good with the words, but he got all that kind of mythical wordage from these Q'ero people, and he's literally lived with them for 50 years of his life, that closely. And I think he's a great person to learn from. His website, he has the shaman training program, which is kind of outrageously expensive. So if you don't want to be a healer yourself, you don't want to take that program, but he does a lot of free courses if you sign up on the fourwinds.org site. And his blog has incredible writing as well. But his books are phenomenal. And I really do have a lot of respect for what he's done. There's other, one thing I wanted to tell you guys is that the indigenous people themselves, it's a different kind of teaching. Like, I love learning from someone who's an anthropologist, just the whole background. And then after I have a little bit of a foundation, I go back, I hang out with the Q'ero and live with them for a couple of weeks at a time. And the way you learn from them, it's like a watch and follow kind of learning. And it's also, like I said, that transmission where things are coming to you, but you don't even know what's happening. So there's different ways that different people process information. But for me, I like the combination.
Yeah. And just a little plug. On Dr. G's webpage for Bees, Dreams, and Medicine, there is a link to the Four Winds and a specific article that Alberto wrote about Illumination and Pachamama. So you can just connect there, and then from there.
There's actually hundreds of articles on his blog, and they're really phenomenally written. They're wonderful.
Right. So there's another question. if the Caro were up in the mountains for 400 or 500 years, are there any records of what they were doing up there? Were they the ones that built Machu Picchu? Are they like
We didn't build
what?
Machu Picchu.
What?
No,
what
the Machu Picchu was built by the Inca,
okay,
the Inca society. So the Laika were just the priesthood they were a sect of priesthood from the Inca that had this particular philosophy. There were other Inca priests too. The Inca, like I said, because the Inca had taken over so many different types of indigenous tribes, there wasn't a lot of, it was hard for them to create one society from that, because they took all these tribes, like 37 million people from all over South America, to try to create one thing. And it just, people had different ideas already. There were similarities in some stuff, but this particular group, they believe they're descendants of the Inca, but they aren't the only descendants of the Inca. They were just this one tribe with this one particular prophecy, and that's what made them different. And I can't answer the question about, it's not a, I know it's not a written lineage. Their lineage is all oral, but I do believe they have a lot of that history has been passed down orally. But it's a small community. There's under 1,000 people
wow,
today. And that, you know what I mean? So they're actually considered, you know, UNESCO has these, they're considered one of the intangible cultures in UNESCO to
right.
preserve.
It's super fascinating, and that there are only 1,000.
Right.
How fantastic that people like you are actually helping their culture to continue and,
Well, that's
hopefully
why they're kind of
grow.
desperate to share it, right? Because they see the time has come, and we're in that time of Pachacuti where the earth is needing to be shaken up, and we need to move to that next homo luminous level fast. So, you know, if you want to fly me to America and go on tour, I will, and share my information. So these little Peruvian men in their pink outfits and cute hats are on tour now.
Right. So Jenny has a question. When you were describing all of this, you had a reference to the Pleiades, and she's wondering if you could explain more about what that reference was.
So they, a lot of their kind of like holy days have to do with astronomically things happening in the constellation Pleiades. And when Alberto's done some like translation with me with them, there's something to do with where they believe that even some aliens from Pleiades are part of their ancestry. So I don't know too many details about it, but I know it is written about, and different people who've written about the Pacos have talked about this before. And I think that probably Alberto would be a good person to learn that from too.
Laura, I saw you shaking your head.
That's just not an uncommon reference. It really isn't. And in the mythologies of these bee priestesses and stuff, that there is talk of like bees bring basically the genetics from outer space. And I believe a lot of references made through the Pleiades. Like that some kind of seed came and the bees had something to do with it. I don't know, according to a lot of mythologies. So I'm not at all surprised to hear Pleiades. And I'm also struck because the piece that I wrote yesterday, I wrote that, I just kind of was remembering Peru. And so I just kind of wrote this little piece. And the last sentence was that if I went up to one of those astronomers' towers and was up there, I think I would just float right off to the Pleiades. You're just so up there in heaven that you could just be like in space, that there's one step and you're in space, and I literally felt like I couldn't go up there, because if I fell asleep at night, I would just float off and go to the Pleiades.
I remember when I first heard that, I was like, what? I mean, you just don't think of like I think, okay, that's Mount Shasta stuff. But now, like, I'm like, oh, interesting. Let me learn more about this.
It's incredibly common, I think. And in fact, I think the muses were even the Pleiades,
Mm.
so, and the muses, this whole old Greek, of course, you probably know this, but, a lot of times we look at these Greek myths, those are just the patriarchal retelling of indigenous Greek mythologies, so there's going to be some really interesting, deeper stories that have to do with the indigenous wisdom. And I just find that very interesting. Again,
That's a good question. Thank you. I'm going to look into that more myself. Yeah.
So I don't mean to take us on a tangent. However, I know that you have been traveling around the world, that you've been studying the medicines and healing rituals and ceremonies around the world, and have been learning from indigenous peoples all over on many continents. How do you keep it straight in your head? How do you keep the medicines separated, or do you integrate them?
You mean when I'm working with people?
When you're working with people or keeping it in your head. And I know about your projects of doing various things to share these learnings, but there must be so much information that you're downloading. How do you keep it straight?
Like, I feel like it's kind of archived, right? And that it gets activated with something I see, or I might work on a patient and I might be working on fertility. And then what needs to be activated gets activated and it comes kind of through me. So it's not something I psychologically think about. It's kind of like archived, and it comes through in the time it's supposed to, as far as for the healing. I have a very organized brain, Capricorn moon. So my brain's pretty organized as far as cultural, but I also love to see the connection between how things overlap and stuff. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
I think I might. I mean, I know he was talking about you, but I think, Steve, it's almost like, it's like you as us as individuals making friends. We don't necessarily, we can tell our friends apart, and we are influenced by our friendships, but we don't have to keep those things that are separated are just wisdoms from each person, or talents, gifts, flair, style from each person. And I think when we're studying cultures and everything, I don't know how important it is to keep everything separated, to have that knowledge separated. That's more of a one kind of brain, organized brain type of thinking. Whereas when we're doing more an embodied thing, like about spirituality or healing, those things come through and you're an instrument. And it's not necessarily.
I was just going to say, like how musicians, they learn different types of music, they jam with different people, and then they come up with their own way of expressing that. For me, that's how it's worked in healing,
Like it's a tool, it's an instrument and a tool. And you can play a guitar, or you can play a sitar, or you can play a violin. But if you know one of them, you could probably figure out some things about the other ones. And yeah, like you said, it's musician. It's all rock and roll, baby.
Don't start on the rock and roll path.
Okay.
That's 15 years worth of stories.
Fun, good times.
So does anybody else have any other questions? I don't have any in the chat. And if not,
who I bet, let me see if she's still here before I call on her. I'm going to do a gallery view here. Is Rebecca still on? Because Rebecca's done a lot of traveling, and it might be interesting to compare a little bit of, because Rebecca's working a lot with in Mexico, and is getting ready to go to Mexico. And I know these are vastly different cultures, but Rebecca, was anything kind of inspiring you about what you know about Mayan people and this, some of these, because you've been hanging out, haven't you been hanging out with somebody who does a lot of, who's doing a lot of teachings?
Yeah. I just dropped her off at the airport yesterday. Shuni Duran is a Mayan Aki, which is a wisdom and timekeeper. She's from Guatemala, and she's been staying with me, and we're going to travel to Mexico together to start a Mayan women's Melipona beekeeping project
Wow.
in December. Yay! So I will be much more immersed in Mayan culture shortly. But Shuni would say that the Mayans never disappeared, that the other cultures you mentioned, Dr. G, that the Incas have been around a couple hundred years. The Aztecs only lasted 400 years. The Mayans would say that they've been here 26,000 years. So their
Yeah, go ahead.
their wisdom is everything they do is observation, observation, observation. They watch the cycles of time. And tomorrow is a solar eclipse. We had the lunar eclipse 2 weeks ago, and these are important portals. So there's absolutely overlaps between Inca wisdom and Mayan wisdom. And there, I think, also distinct differences. And it might be the landscape. It's really fascinating and interesting. But absolutely, it's paying homage to the land and the what animates us, what animates our spirit.
Hmm. There's really a lot of overlap between the Mayan and, like I said, ethnically, that tribe that came from the Bering Strait influenced the Hopi, the Mayan, and the Inca. And the Mayan have an acupuncture system. They have a abdominal massage that's also done in Asia and China. They talk about the elements in a very same way that they talk about it in Chinese medicine. I think there's a book called The Wind in the Blood that really kind of compares Chinese medicine with Mayan medicine and talks about the similar origin. And, even though these kind of like the big civilizations might have lasted of the Inca 150, 200 years, like I said, they were an assimilation of thousands of years of indigenous wisdom before that. And they were part of that rose up and called themselves the Inca. But they're a continuation as well. It's just, they just got the good branding, right?
Another interesting fact about the Mayan civilization is that they credit the Melipona bee with teaching them how to build the pyramids. So the bee really figures strongly in their cultural mythology and cosmology.
Oh, I'd love to learn more about that.
One of the funny things about the bee, Dr. G, is a lot of time it's hidden just right out of sight. And you just don't realize, because the bee stories are not like as sexy and as powerful as some of these other, glamorous ones like condors and eagles and llamas and hummingbirds. The bee is so humble and such a minor little tiny little thing, so a lot of times it's been told something else, like in the Mayans for a long time it was called the diving god, but it was a Melipona bee. Yeah. And if you look at the Melipona bee and you look at the diving god, which is what patriarchy and Western people called it, it's not a diving god. It's actually the way a Melipona bee would look if it was going into its honey pot. So so a lot of times the bee, watch for it, because you'll see it in different things like stripes or certain things that they're wearing, or like certain things that they're holding. We'll see reference over and over cross culturally, so it's interesting. There's a lot of combinations. I did have another question for you before we end today. And wait just a second. It was about, I forgot. Steve, did we have any more questions come up? I got to remember this question. It was a good one.
No, there aren't.
Just I do have another comment,
I know what it was.
Dr. G, about acupuncture, that the original acupuncture, from what I've learned, is they would dip their needles in bee venom. So that the sting was the original acupuncture. And we as bee people believe that bees will actually offer themselves and sting us in acupuncture points and
Wow.
offer their life to us in order to help heal us.
Wow. I believe that.
Yeah, me too.
I
That-
like that.
I know what my question was. I think Steve was telling me that you did some kind of ritual bathing. Like, is that true? Was that Steve? Was
Yeah,
that
Limpia.
Olympia?
The Mayan, there's a Mayan herbal bath, and the Olympia is a curanderismo. All of Central Americans do that, where they do the floral baths.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because let me just explain. We're going to do a worldwide watering women ritual where we're going to bless the water with our bodies and bless our bodies with water. And we're going to bless our water systems all the way through the sewers. And we're going to learn all about our water systems. And we're going to do this all around the world on February 16th. So when Steve told me that, I was like, oh, I want to hear a little more about what
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I can demonstrate and talk about the Mayan, but it's not just Mayan. Actually, all of Central and South Indigenous people through curanderos do these kind of herbal baths, where it's actually a prayer and a cleansing. It's a cleaning of that person's aura, and it's done for somebody else. And you kind of go out and find out what the person's needs are. And then they'll go into the environment and they'll offer prayers, whether the prayers are to Mother Nature or prayers are to Jesus and Mary, whatever that person needs. But they pick the herbs praying for the intention, and they put it into a bath, and they let the sun and the moon infuse it. And then there's a whole ritual of cleansing that person's aura by spraying the herbs and the water around them. And this is, I've seen this in Morocco. My husband's family does some kind of version of this. The women will do that if like they think somebody got an evil eye was looking at them, because they believe in the evil eye all over the Mediterranean. They'll go out and do the herbal bath. It's almost just like the kind they do in Central America. And they're Muslims. So, but it's, I think it's common in a lot of cultures, but it's part of curanderismo and an extension of the indigenous. And a lot of the curanderismo wasn't just indigenous, it was actually brought from the Mediterranean because the Spanish brought it. And the Spanish kind of got a lot of that through when the Moors were in Spain for how many, 800 years, so the North African traditions that are in curanderismo came from the Spanish, actually,
It
like
is interesting.
The evil eye, that came from the Spanish.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have some theories about the evil eye. I actually have them up in my house. I love the evil eye, but I don't call it that because to me, I think it's a lunar thing and a goddess eye, but that's another class. I love that. That made me also think of yoni steams. You know how people are doing yoni steams?
That's a Mayan. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've been incorporating some of those wisdoms even in modern time.
Yeah.
How interesting is that? And
I learned that from the Mayan healers that taught me the Mayan abdominal massage, which is a uterine alignment.
And they taught you about a yoni steaming?
Yeah, it's part of their healing. Yeah.
Really? Now, do they get how do you go off into a room, or do you do it like they do in LA and everybody sits in a room and you all get a turn?
Like the group
Is this the direction we're going to go right now in our last 5
say
minutes?
that for the
Don't be uncomfortable. This is women's talk. You're just
I'm not uncomfortable. I just know you're going to get very deep into this.
No, we won't. But I do want to know. I mean, I
minutes.
think it's interesting. It's important. It's It's exactly what we're talking about.
They're not group yoni steams, no, but they are one-on-one. And the curandera will make up the bath for the woman and the heat, and she'll put her over it.
I
with
love
the
that.
coming up. Yeah.
Well, on the subject of Morocco, I had a bath, and my family is deeply connected to Morocco. My grandmother at 80 something had a boyfriend that she would go visit, and our whole family, maybe even her 90s, I think. But we all had family connections because my grandmother's lover's family. But anyway, I went there and I got to take a bath in the hammam, and it was the hottest room ever, and it was a group female thing, and it was really wonderful. And I do remember there were some herbs involved in that. But anyway, I would love also for you to tell us some more about what are you doing? What are you up to? How can people find out more about how to work with you?
Well, I have my practice in New York, still doing that, the Urban Alchemist. I'm still seeing patients. I have private clients, and sometimes I'll do like a group program or whatever. But I'm developing a television show right now that's kind of let's say a healing version of Anthony Bourdain. Kind of what we just did is I take people on an adventure and into a culture, and it's an experience of that culture through the lens of healing. And the lens of healing is the herbs and the superfoods, the actual healers, gurus, sages, the music, the food, the beauty rituals, all of those intersect to tell a story, so you're observing the culture through the lens of healing and coming away with a story and hopefully something we can bring back to make our lives richer.
I love that show already.
Do you have any, before we go, is there anything that you would like to share with us that has maybe some relevance or uplifting hope, or something specific that you might have heard that we could end this section of our piece on? Anything you want us to really taste from your experience?
Well, when I was writing this, I was just like, there is so much positive stuff actually going on in the world. It's just kind of like, where do we want to focus our awareness on, and it can be overwhelming. And sometimes we think we can't make a big enough impact, but every little small kind of person that we touch and any moment that we touch, I think it's worth it. And I love kind of, whenever I go into a culture, I love just kind of making people feel special. And even in this culture, like in New York, you don't have to really leave New York to have this kind of adventure. You could just go into another neighborhood. And really, we can do that anywhere in the United States. Every city, we can go into another culture and be touched and learn from. And, just to it doesn't have to be a big expedition out of the country to kind of be able to share wisdom from other people and not be shy about sharing what we believe is our ancestral wisdom with them. Like I'll tell people stories about my Lebanese ancestors, and they want to hear that. And if there's a way that we can give back, that's just as meaningful to them too. We have gifts to share too.